The plasma rounds screamed overhead as Sergeant Maya Chen pressed her back against the crumbling wall of what had once been a Zalarian nursery. Her left shoulder burned where the energy bolt had grazed her. The fabric of her combat suit melted and fused to her skin. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage she'd torn from her sleeve, but she couldn't afford to think about the pain right now. Behind her, the soft whimpering continued. Maya turned slowly, her rifle ready, expecting to find wounded Zalarian soldiers. Instead, she found something that made her heart clench. A small figure huddled in the corner, no bigger than a human toddler, with large golden eyes that reflected the orange glow of the burning city beyond the shattered windows. The creature's skin was a pale blue-green, almost translucent, and delicate fronds where hair might be on a human child trembled with each terrified breath. A Zalarian youngling, Maya's training kicked in immediately. Standard protocol was clear about non-combatants, especially children, regardless of species. But this wasn't just any non-combatant. This was the child of an enemy that had been systematically exterminating human colonies for the past 3 years, the same enemy that had glassed New Terra just 6 months ago, killing her younger brother along with 2 million other civilians. The youngling made a soft sound, somewhere between a chirp and a sob. Its large eyes met Maya's, and she saw something universal there. Fear. Pure, innocent fear that transcended species barriers. Maya lowered her rifle. The building shook as another bombardment hit nearby. Dust rained from the ceiling. And somewhere in the distance, she could hear the distinctive whine of Zalarian pulse weapons. The 3rd Marine Battalion was supposed to have secured this sector hours ago, but the enemy had regrouped faster than intelligence had predicted. Now Maya was cut off from her unit, deep in hostile territory, with a wounded shoulder and dwindling ammunition, and apparently a terrified alien child to protect. She approached slowly, keeping her movements deliberate and non-threatening. The youngling pressed itself further into the corner, but didn't try to run. Maybe it was too scared. Maybe it understood, on some instinctual level, that the human soldier was its only chance of survival. "Hey there, little one," Maya whispered, using the same gentle tone she'd once used with her nephew before the war changed everything. "I'm not going to hurt you." The youngling tilted its head, those enormous eyes studying her face. When Maya extended her hand, palm up, the creature took a tentative step forward. Its small fingers, tipped with what looked like tiny claws, touched her glove. The contact was electric, not literally, but emotionally. This was first peaceful contact Maya had had with a Zalarian in 3 years of brutal warfare. Outside, the sounds of battle grew closer. Maya could hear human voices shouting tactical commands, mixed with the alien war cries of Zalarian soldiers. The fighting was moving this way, and she needed to move fast. "Can you understand me?" she asked softly. The youngling made a series of soft clicks and whistles. Maya didn't speak Zalarian, but the tone was unmistakably questioning, curious rather than hostile. Maya pointed to herself. "Maya," she said clearly. The youngling's fronds perked up slightly. It touched its chest with one small hand. "Zixara," it said in a voice like wind chimes. "Zixara," Maya repeated, and was rewarded with what might have been a smile. It was hard to tell with alien features, but the youngling's posture relaxed slightly. A pulse blast shattered what remained of the nursery's front window. Maya grabbed Zixara instinctively, pulling the small form against her chest as debris rained down around them. The youngling was lighter than she'd expected, its body warm against her armor. She could feel its rapid heartbeat through her gloves. "We need to go," Maya murmured, more to herself than to Zixara. "The question is where?" Her tactical display was mostly dead. Victim of the EMP burst that had knocked out half the battalion's equipment an hour ago. But she had a general sense of direction. The human evacuation point was roughly 2 kilometers northeast, assuming it hadn't been overrun. The problem was getting there alive, wounded, and with a Zalarian child in tow. Maya stood carefully, keeping Zix's aura tucked against her good side. The youngling clung to her armor with surprising strength, those small claws finding purchase in the tactical webbing. It was smart enough to stay quiet, Maya realized. That was good. Noise would get them both killed. She moved to the rear exit of the nursery, checking the alley beyond through the cracked door. Empty for now, but she could see the glow of fires reflecting off the buildings ahead. The air tasted of smoke and ozone from energy weapons. Somewhere in the distance, a human dropship's engine screamed as it lifted off under fire. Maya adjusted her grip on her rifle, keeping Zixara secure with her wounded arm, despite the pain that shot through her shoulder. The youngling seemed to sense her discomfort and shifted slightly, distributing its weight more evenly. Intelligent, Maya thought. Very intelligent. They moved into the alley, Maya's boots silent on the rubble-strewn ground. Every few meters, she paused to listen, to scan for movement. Twice, she heard the heavy footsteps of Zalarian soldiers passing nearby, their alien voices sharp with urgency. Each time she pressed herself and Zixara deeper into the shadows, waiting until the danger passed. The first kilometer was the worst. They had to cross 3 main thoroughfares, each one a potential killing ground. Maya used smoke from burning buildings as cover, timing their movements between the patrols she could hear but not see. Zixara remained perfectly still throughout, even when a Zalarian patrol passed within meters of their hiding spot behind an overturned civilian transport. It was during the second kilometer that Maya realized they were being hunted. The signs were subtle at first, the same set of footsteps appearing behind them at regular intervals, shadows that moved wrong in her peripheral vision. But when she ducked into an abandoned shop to rest her wounded shoulder and saw the same tall Zalarian warrior watching from 3 different positions over the span of 10 minutes, she knew for certain. They'd been spotted. Maya checked her ammunition, 17 rounds in her current magazine, 2 more mags in her belt. Against a full Zalarian hunting party, it wouldn't be nearly enough, but she'd faced worse odds before. The trick was not to fight them all at once. She looked down at Zixara, who gazed back with those trusting golden eyes. The youngling had absolute faith that the human soldier would protect it. Maya felt the weight of that trust like a physical thing, heavier than any weapon she'd ever carried. "Okay, little one," she whispered. "Time to show these warriors why humans are so hard to kill." Maya moved deeper into the shop, toward the back exit she'd spotted earlier. But instead of heading for the door, she climbed. The shop's storage area had a ladder leading to the roof, and from there she could see the layout of the surrounding blocks. More importantly, she could see her hunters. 5 Zalarians, moving in a classic search pattern. They were good, professional, but they were used to hunting humans who followed predictable patterns. Maya had grown up in the asteroid mining colonies, where 3-dimensional thinking wasn't just an advantage, it was survival. She secured Zixara more tightly against her chest and began to move across the rooftops. The first hunter never knew what hit him. Maya dropped from above, her combat knife finding the gap between helmet and neck armor before the Zalarian could raise his weapon. She caught his pulse rifle as he fell, the familiar weight of enemy hardware solid in her hands. 1 down, 4 to go. The second hunter found his companion's body 3 minutes later. Maya watched from a ventilation shaft as the warrior called out in the clicking, musical language of his people. When backup arrived, she was already 2 buildings away, but Zixara was getting heavier, and her shoulder was bleeding more freely now. Maya could feel her strength ebbing with each movement. Worse, the youngling was starting to make soft, distressed sounds. It could sense her pain, her exhaustion. Maya found a defensible position in the ruins of what had been a Zalarian cultural center. Ironically, the walls were covered with murals depicting Zalarian and human figures working together, exploring the stars side by side. Propaganda from before the war, when first contact had seemed like the beginning of a golden age instead of a prelude to genocide. She set Zix-Ara down gently and checked the approaches. 3 ways in, but only 1 way out. Not ideal, but it would have to do. The remaining hunters found them 20 minutes later. Maya heard them coming long before they appeared, their alien voices coordinating the final approach. She'd used the time to prepare as best she could with limited resources, improvised explosive devices from her remaining grenades, and some industrial chemicals she'd found, choke points created with strategically placed debris. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. Zix-Ara huddled behind an overturned display case, watching with those enormous eyes as Maya made her final preparations. The youngling understood, somehow, that this was the last stand, that everything depended on the next few minutes. The first Zalarian appeared in the main entrance, moving with the fluid grace of a trained warrior. Maya let him advance 3 steps before detonating her first improvised mine. The explosion lit up the chamber, and when the smoke cleared, she was already moving. The firefight was brief, but vicious. Pulse bolts and projectile rounds filled the air, turning the cultural center into a lightning storm of destruction. Maya used every trick she'd learned in 3 years of war, every advantage the human body had over Zalarian physiology. She was stronger, more durable, capable of taking damage that would disable her enemies. But there were still 3 of them, and only 1 of her. Maya felt the pulse bolt hit her leg, spinning her around and sending her crashing into a display of Zalarian art. The irony wasn't lost on her as ancient sculptures, depicting scenes of interstellar peace and cooperation, shattered under her weight. She tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Her leg was a mass of pain, the pulse bolt having burned through muscle and possibly bone. Across the chamber, she could see the remaining 2 hunters advancing cautiously, their weapons trained on her position. Behind her, Zix-Ara made a sound Maya had never heard before. Not fear this time, but something else. Something that sounded almost like determination. Maya turned in time to see the youngling stand up from behind the display case and walk slowly toward the advancing warriors. "No," Maya whispered, but her voice was lost in the crackling of burning debris around them. Zix-Ara stopped halfway between Maya and the hunters and began to speak in rapid Zalarian. The warriors froze, their weapons wavering. Maya couldn't understand the words, but she could hear the authority in that small voice, the absolute command that somehow came from a being no bigger than a human toddler. One of the warriors lowered his weapon entirely. The other hesitated, clearly torn between orders and whatever Zix-Ara was saying. Maya used the distraction to drag herself upright, her rifle steady despite the pain in her leg. If this went wrong, if the hunters decided to ignore whatever Zix-Ara was telling them, she'd make sure they paid dearly for threatening the youngling. But the warriors were backing away now, their postures changing from aggressive to something Maya had never seen in a Zalarian soldier before: uncertainty. Almost deference? Zix-Ara continued speaking, its voice growing stronger with each word, and slowly, impossibly, the hunters turned and left. Maya collapsed against the broken display, her adrenaline finally giving out. Zix-Ara hurried back to her side, small hands touching her face with what felt like concern. "What did you tell them?" Maya asked. Though she knew the youngling couldn't understand, Zix-Ara made soft clicking sounds and pointed to the murals around them, the ones showing humans and Zalarians as allies. Then it pointed to Maya and to itself. Maybe it didn't need translation after all. Maya's field dressing on her leg was already soaked through with blood, but she forced herself to keep moving. Zix-Ara walked beside her now rather than being carried, the youngling's small hand gripping Maya's combat glove with surprising determination. Every few steps, the alien child would look up at her with those golden eyes, as if checking to make sure the human warrior was still conscious. The encounter with the hunters had changed something fundamental. Word was spreading through the Zalarian forces, Maya could tell. They'd passed 3 more patrols in the last hour, and each time the warriors had simply watched them go. Some had even stepped aside to clear their path. It was unprecedented in 3 years of brutal warfare, and Maya didn't understand it. But she was grateful for it. The evacuation point was supposed to be a human-forward operating base established in the ruins of the old spaceport. As they crested a hill overlooking the facility, Maya's heart sank. The base was under heavy assault. Zalarian fighters screamed overhead, their pulse cannons turning defensive positions into molten slag. On the ground, she could see the distinctive blue-white flashes of energy weapons as alien infantry pressed their attack. The last human transport was lifting off even as they watched, its engines straining under the weight of evacuees and enemy fire. Maya raised her rifle instinctively, though she knew there was nothing she could do from this distance. The ship made it perhaps 50 meters before a direct hit from a Zalarian heavy weapon sent it spinning back toward the ground in a ball of flame. There would be no rescue, no extraction. They were on their own. Zixara tugged at her sleeve, pointing toward a different section of the spaceport. Maya followed the youngling's gesture and saw what she'd missed in her focus on the battle. A small maintenance hangar, isolated from the main fighting, where several civilian craft sat abandoned. Most looked damaged, but one appeared intact. "You think we can fly out of here?" Maya asked softly. Zixara nodded emphatically, then began walking toward the hangar with the confident stride of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Maya followed. Though every instinct screamed that this was insane, she was a Marine, not a pilot. Her experience with spacecraft was limited to being a passenger on military transports. But looking at the burning evacuation site, she realized insane might be their only option. The hangar was eerily quiet compared to the chaos outside. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across the maintenance bay, where several small craft sat in various states of repair. Zixara moved directly to a sleek vessel near the back, its hull bearing the flowing script of Zalarian writing. "That's an enemy ship," Maya said, though she realized the youngling couldn't understand her words. Zixara looked back at her and made a series of rapid clicks and whistles. Then it placed its small hand on a panel beside the ship's boarding ramp. The panel glowed briefly, and the ramp began to lower with a soft pneumatic hiss. Maya stared. "You opened it." The youngling beckoned for her to follow and disappeared up the ramp into the ship's interior. After a moment's hesitation, Maya limped after it, her rifle ready despite the apparent lack of immediate threat. The ship's interior was unlike anything she'd seen before. Where human vessels prioritized function over form, this craft was a work of art. The walls seemed to flow like water frozen in motion, and soft bioluminescent strips provided gentle illumination. Everything was proportioned for beings smaller than humans, but Maya could navigate the corridors if she crouched slightly. Zixara led her to what was obviously the cockpit, though it looked more like the inside of a flower than a control room. The pilot's chair was surrounded by organic-looking interfaces that pulsed with their own inner light. The youngling climbed into the pilot's seat and began touching controls with practiced ease. Maya's jaw dropped. "You're a pilot?" Zixara looked back at her and made what might have been a laugh, a sound like tiny bells. Then it pointed to itself and made a complex gesture that somehow conveyed both youth and importance. "You're not just any youngling," Maya realized. "You're someone special." The engines came to life with a sound unlike anything Maya had heard before, less like mechanical propulsion and more like a song. Through the cockpit's transparent canopy, She could see Zalarian fighters still engaged in their assault on the human base. They'd have perhaps minutes before someone noticed an unauthorized launch. Zixara's hands moved across the controls with fluid precision, and Maya felt the ship lift off so smoothly it was like floating on water. But instead of heading for orbit immediately, the Youngling turned toward the battle raging around the evacuation site. "What are you doing?" Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew. The ship descended toward the burning wreckage of the human transport. Through the canopy, Maya could see survivors scattered across the landing field, some wounded, all trapped between the wreckage and advancing Zalarian forces. Her fellow Marines were making their last stand, and they were losing. Zixara looked at Maya and clicked something that sounded like a question. The meaning was clear even without translation. Should we help them? Maya thought of her standing orders, her duty to her unit, her species, her oath as a Marine. Then she thought of her brother, killed when the Zalarians glassed New Terra. She thought of every human colony that had been reduced to radioactive ash over the past 3 years. And she thought of the small alien child who had somehow made Zalarian warriors stand down with nothing but words. "Yes," Maya said. "We helped them." Zixara's response was immediate. The ship dropped into a combat dive that would have impressed any human pilot, weapon systems coming online automatically. But instead of firing on the human positions, pulse bolts lanced out toward the Zalarian forces attacking them. The effect was electric. Confused alien voices filled the communication channels as friendly fire alerts screamed through Zalarian command networks. Maya watched through the canopy as enemy soldiers scrambled for cover, uncertain whether they were under attack from human reinforcements or suffering some kind of massive tactical error. Zixara used the confusion masterfully, providing cover fire that allowed the surviving humans to reach more defensible positions while never actually engaging Zalarian forces directly. Instead, the Youngling targeted equipment, vehicles, and weapons emplacements. Destructive enough to be tactically significant, but causing minimal casualties among the alien forces. It was brilliant strategy from someone who couldn't be more than a child. Maya activated her emergency beacon, broadcasting on human frequencies. "Any surviving personnel, this is Sergeant Chen. We have air support and extraction capability. Rally on my beacon for immediate evacuation." The response was immediate. "Chen, this is Lieutenant Morrison. Where the hell did you find a Zalarian fighter pilot willing to help humans?" Maya looked at Zixara, who was calmly coordinating their approach to the rally point while maintaining suppressive fire on 3 different enemy positions. "It's complicated, Lieutenant." The rescue operation took 27 minutes that felt like hours. Maya served as the link between Zixara and the human forces, using hand signals and gestures to coordinate the extraction. The Youngling seemed to understand tactical concepts instinctively, positioning the ship to provide maximum cover while allowing survivors to board in groups. 19 humans made it aboard before Zalarian reinforcements arrived in force. Maya watched through the cockpit as massive enemy battleships dropped out of orbit, their weapons beginning to charge for orbital bombardment. "Time to go," she told Zixara. The Youngling's response was to accelerate straight up, the ship's engines singing as they climbed toward space. Behind them, Maya could see energy beams lancing down from the battleships, turning the spaceport into a crater of molten metal and stone. They'd made it out with minutes to spare, but their problems were far from over. Zalarian fighters were forming up around them, and Maya could see weapons locks appearing on the tactical display. She was about to suggest evasive maneuvers when Zixara began broadcasting on Zalarian frequencies. Maya couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Command, authority. The voice of someone who expected to be obeyed without question. The weapons locks disappeared. The fighters began to fall back into escort formation rather than attack positions. "What did you tell them?" Maya asked. Zixara touched a control panel, and the main display shifted to show a star chart. A course was already plotted, leading to a system Maya didn't recognize. The youngling pointed to their destination, then to itself, then made a gesture that somehow conveyed vast importance. In the ship's cargo bay, Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom. "Chen, I don't know what kind of magic you're working up there, but whatever it is, keep doing it. We've got a full Zalarian battle fleet out here, and they're just watching us go." Maya studied Zixara's face, seeing something in those golden eyes that she'd missed before. Intelligence, yes. Compassion, certainly. But also the weight of responsibility that came with authority beyond the youngling's apparent years. "Your royalty," Maya said quietly. "Aren't you?" Zixara tilted its head in what might have been acknowledgement. Then it returned to the navigation controls, making minor course corrections as they entered hyperspace. Through the cockpit canopy, Maya watched the stars stretch into lines as they jumped to faster-than-light travel. Wherever they were going, whatever Zixara intended, there was no turning back now. But for the first time since the war began, Maya felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. Behind them, 19 human survivors sat in stunned silence in the cargo bay of an alien ship, trying to process what had just happened. Ahead of them lay a destination none of them could have imagined, and between them all, one small Xalarian youngling piloted their ship with the steady confidence of someone carrying the weight of two species' futures on their shoulders. The war was about to change in ways none of them could yet comprehend, but Maya was beginning to suspect that the little alien who had clung to her through a battlefield had plans that went far beyond simple survival, plans that might just save them all. The destination system contained 3 planets orbiting a binary star, but Zixara guided their ship toward what appeared to be an artificial construct positioned at the system's gravitational center. As they approached, Maya realized the structure was massive, beyond anything humans had ever built. A complex lattice of crystal and metal that stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. "What is this place?" Lieutenant Morrison asked over the intercom from the cargo bay. Maya looked at Zixara, who had grown increasingly agitated as they approached their destination. The youngling's fronds were moving in rapid, nervous patterns, and its golden eyes held what looked like apprehension mixed with determination. "I think," Maya said slowly, "we're about to find out." The construct's docking bays opened to receive them without any apparent communication being exchanged. Zixara piloted them through passages that seemed to resize themselves to accommodate their ship, the walls flowing like liquid metal around them. Everything about this place suggested technology far beyond what either humans or Zalarians had achieved in the war. They came to rest in a chamber that felt more grown than built. Bioluminescent panels provided soft illumination, and the air that cycled through their ship when the seals engaged carried the scent of growing things, clean water, and something else Maya couldn't identify. Zixara stood from the pilot's chair and moved toward the exit ramp. Before leaving the cockpit, the youngling stopped and looked directly at Maya. It reached up and touched the human's face gently, those small clawed fingers tracing the scar on her cheek where shrapnel had caught her during the Battle of Kepler Station. Then Zixara made a sound Maya had never heard before, something between a song and a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of worlds. "You're scared," Maya realized. "Whatever this is, you're as nervous about it as I am." The youngling nodded once, then gestured for Maya to follow. The construct's interior was even more impressive than its exterior. Corridors stretched away in impossible directions, their surfaces covered with flowing script in dozens of languages Maya didn't recognize. Some looked vaguely Zalarian, others were completely alien, and a few had the angular precision of human writing. They weren't alone here. The first beings they encountered were clearly Zalarian, but different from any Maya had seen during the war. These individuals were taller, more graceful, their clothing made from materials that seemed to shift color with their movements. When they saw Zixara, they dropped to one knee in gestures of profound respect. The youngling acknowledged them briefly, then continued walking with the purposeful stride of someone who knew exactly where they were going. More beings appeared as they moved deeper into the construct. Maya saw species she didn't recognize, humanoid forms that might have been distant cousins of her own kind, and stranger things that moved in ways that suggested entirely different evolutionary paths. All of them reacted to Zixara with the same mixture of respect and what looked like relief. Finally, they arrived at what could only be described as a council chamber. The room was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow above, with seating arranged in concentric circles around a central platform. Beings of dozens of different species occupied the seats, all of them turning to watch as Maya and Zixara entered. The youngling walked directly to the central platform and began to speak in its native language. Maya couldn't understand the words, but she could hear the formality in them, the careful precision of someone delivering a prepared speech. Around the chamber, alien faces showed expressions she couldn't read, but that somehow conveyed intense attention. When Zixara finished speaking, the chamber erupted into discussion. Maya caught fragments in various languages, some of which her combat translator could partially parse. Words like treaty, violation, and war appeared repeatedly, along with terms that had no human equivalent. An elderly Zalarian rose from one of the front rows and approached the platform. This individual was clearly ancient even by alien standards, their movements careful but dignified. When they spoke, their voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Zixara responded with what sounded like an argument. The youngling gestured toward Maya repeatedly, their voice rising with what could only be passion or desperation. Maya felt dozens of alien eyes studying her, evaluating her in ways she couldn't comprehend. She kept her rifle lowered but ready, though she suspected that if these beings meant harm, her weapon would be useless against their numbers and technology. The discussion continued for nearly an hour before reaching some kind of conclusion. The elderly Zalarian made a formal gesture toward Zixara, who responded with obvious relief. Then the youngling turned and beckoned Maya to join them on the platform. "I don't understand what's happening," Maya said as she approached. Zixara touched a crystalline panel beside the platform, and suddenly Maya could understand the alien voices around her. The translation wasn't perfect, but it was enough to follow the conversation. "The young speaker argues for immediate cessation of hostilities," the elderly Zalarian was saying. "They claim to have found evidence that the war between our species and the humans is based on fundamental misunderstandings." Maya's mind reeled. "Speaker? You're some kind of diplomat?" Zixara looked up at her and clicked something that the translator rendered as, "the youngest speaker in our history, and the first to speak for peace in 3 generations. "The council requires proof," another voice said, this one belonging to a being Maya didn't recognize. "Words are not sufficient when blood has been spilled by both species." Zixara gestured toward Maya again and began speaking rapidly. The translation came through in fragments. "Protected me, battlefield, carried wounded enemy, saved warriors who would have killed her." Maya began to understand. She was the proof. A human soldier who had chosen to protect a Zalarian child instead of leaving it to die, despite everything her species had suffered in the war. But the council wasn't satisfied with second-hand testimony. They wanted to see for themselves. The next several hours were unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. Using technology she couldn't begin to understand, the council extracted and displayed her memories of the past few days. Every moment from finding Zixara in the nursery to their arrival at the construct played out in 3-dimensional holography for the assembled beings to witness. Maya watched herself carry the wounded youngling across the battlefield. She saw her own face as she made the decision to protect rather than abandon her former enemy. She witnessed the moment when Zixara stopped the hunters with nothing but words, and the rescue operation that saved 19 human lives with the help of alien technology. When the display ended, the chamber fell silent. The elderly Zalarian was the first to speak. The human showed mercy to our most precious young one, despite having every reason for hatred. And the young speaker risked their life to save human warriors, added another voice. This suggests possibility for understanding. But not everyone was convinced. A group of beings in the rear seats began making harsh sounds that the translator couldn't parse. Maya suspected they were expressing skepticism or outright opposition. Zixara stepped forward and began speaking again, their young voice carrying absolute conviction. Maya caught fragments through the translator. 2 species, similar evolution, same capacity for good and evil, war based on lies. What lies? The elderly Zalarian asked. Zixara activated another display, this one showing star charts and what looked like tactical information. Maya recognized some of the locations as human colony worlds that had been attacked early in the war. The attacks on human worlds were not ordered by our council, Zixara said, their translated words causing murmurs of surprise around the chamber. A rogue faction of our military, seeking to claim human territory for themselves, initiated hostilities without authorization. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. You're saying this whole war started because of unauthorized attacks? And the humans' retaliation, while understandable, struck worlds that had no knowledge of the rogue faction's actions, Zixara continued. Innocent civilian populations on both sides have suffered for the ambitions of a few. The implications were staggering. 3 years of warfare, millions of deaths, entire worlds reduced to ash, all because of a massive failure of communication and rogue elements on both sides. The young speaker proposes immediate peace negotiations, the elderly Zalarian announced. With the human as witness to their good faith. Maya looked around the chamber at the assembled beings, representing species and civilizations she'd never imagined existed. You want me to be some kind of ambassador? Zixara touched her hand gently and spoke directly to her. You saved me when you had no reason to trust. I saved your warriors when I had no reason to hope. Together, we prove that peace is possible. Maya thought of her brother, killed in the glassing of New Terra. She thought of the Zalarian warriors she'd killed during 3 years of brutal combat. She thought of the nursery where she'd found Zixara and all the other younglings who hadn't been lucky enough to find protection in the chaos of war. What do you need me to do? The answer, it turned out, was more complex than she'd expected. Over the following days, Maya found herself at the center of the most important diplomatic initiative in galactic history. The construct served as neutral ground where human and Zalarian representatives could meet safely, with dozens of other species serving as mediators and witnesses. Maya's role was unique. She wasn't a diplomat or a politician, just a soldier who had chosen compassion over hatred at a critical moment. Her testimony about Zalarian military honor and Zixara's courage carried weight precisely because it came from someone who had every reason to hate their former enemies. The negotiations were difficult and often contentious. Trust had been shattered by 3 years of warfare, and both species had legitimate grievances that couldn't be dismissed. But slowly, painfully, progress was made. The breakthrough came when Zixara provided evidence of the rogue faction's activities, including communications that proved the unauthorized nature of their attacks on human worlds. In response, human negotiators shared similar evidence of their own military commanders who had continued prosecuting the war beyond what their civilian leadership had authorized. Both species, it turned out, had been led into an escalating conflict by elements that prioritized conquest over peace. The final treaty took weeks to negotiate, but when it was signed, it established not just peace between humans and Zalarians, but the foundation for a galactic confederation that would prevent such misunderstandings in the future. Trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, and joint exploration initiatives replaced the weapons and warships that had defined their relationship. Maya found herself offered a position as the first human ambassador to the Zalarian worlds, but she declined. She was a soldier, not a diplomat, and her place was with the Marines who had fought alongside her. But before returning to human space, she had one final conversation with Zixara. They stood together in the construct's observation deck, looking out at the stars that no longer represented enemy territory, but rather potential homes for both their species. "I still don't understand how someone so young could have so much authority," Maya said. Zixara made the sound that served as their laughter. "In our culture, speakers are chosen for their ability to see beyond the present moment. Age is less important than wisdom. And they chose a child? They chose someone who had not yet learned that peace was impossible," Zixara corrected. "Someone young enough to believe that former enemies could become friends." Maya smiled, thinking of her nephew back on Earth, the one she'd thought about when she first found Zixara in the ruins. Maybe that's something adults forget too easily. Perhaps. But now we have the chance to remember. When Maya finally returned to human space, she carried with her more than just the treaty that ended the war. She carried the memory of a small alien child who had trusted her completely, and the knowledge that even in the darkest circumstances, choosing compassion over hatred could change the course of history. The war was over. The peace that followed would last for generations, built on the foundation of one human soldier's decision to protect a youngling who turned out to be the key to everything. Sometimes, Maya reflected, the most important battles were won not with weapons, but with the simple choice to see an enemy as someone worth saving. And sometimes, the smallest acts of mercy had the power to reshape the galaxy itself.